NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said he had a very frank and open discussion with Donald Trump at the White House on Wednesday, but he evaded questions as to whether the US president had threatened to leave the alliance. Trump, for his part, blasted NATO on his Truth Social platform shortly after the meeting, repeating his accusations that NATO had not helped Washington secure the Strait of Hormuz during the US war on Iran. Trump also evoked Greenland, which he had earlier this year threatened to invade. And for more on this visit by Mark Rutte to Washington, I can welcome Alexandre Vautravers, Editor-in-Chief of Revue Militaire Suisse. Good morning, Alexandre, and thank you very much for joining us. Mark Rutte was being diplomatic after that meeting yesterday, but was the meeting, in your opinion, a lot worse than he was letting on?
I'm not sure. Mark Rutte has been very successful in his discussions with the American president over the past few months. So let's wait and see.
Now, how realistic is this possibility of the US exiting NATO? The journalists asked it fairly persistently of Mark Rutte yesterday. So it's obviously something that people are thinking of.
I would say people are thinking about it, people are talking about it, and there's a name for this. It's called rhetoric. It's political rhetoric. The real problems are not so much the American withdrawal of the alliance, because technically this is something quite complicated. It may take years. It would completely change the structure of the alliance. But I think that before we get into discussions about retiring from NATO, there are many technical problems that need to be fixed, and urgently. One of them is what is happening with American troops in Europe, what is happening with the possibility for US troops to use air bases or land bases throughout the continent, or islands that are the possession today of the United Kingdom. There's a lot of technical details to be discussed.
Now, even if the US were not to formally withdraw, but is there a sense that perhaps its NATO allies are actually making contingency plans for a greater disengagement by Washington?
I think there's definitely, and this is recognized by most European countries, even those who are the most critical about the alliance, there is a need for self-organization or autonomization within Europe. And let me just take a few examples. There is a need for increased collaboration between France and the United Kingdom, for example, for the securing of naval task forces. Simply, there are not enough means at the national level to handle such important crises as the ones we are facing today. So there's a need for increased collaboration across many different NATO partners, and definitely these discussions have been ongoing since the beginning of the year.
Now, the US's NATO allies had for long humoured Trump's comments and threats, largely because they want to keep him on side with regard to Ukraine. But their attitude did begin to change over the course of the Iran war. Why do you think this was?
There's several aspects. With regards to Ukraine, this is already a very old story. And between the initial rhetoric of the candidate Trump before he was actually elected, I think European partners have stepped up their aid. They have increased their investments. They have started to build production facilities for armament, and so they are carrying the burden with regards to Ukraine that the United States has decided not to fill. So in many different ways between Ukraine and European partners, this situation is not as acute, is not as problematic as it was a few months ago. the situation or the crisis or the armed conflict that is ongoing in the Middle East is a completely different story. And I think we just need to recapitulate. The Middle East is not an area of operations of NATO. So I'm not sure that NATO is the answer to the problems, the queries, the support needed by the United States right now.
Now, the US military never publicly questioned the orders of a presidential administration of any political stripe. But do you have any sense of what Army top brass, or indeed former Army top brass, might be saying privately about Trump's relationship with fellow NATO members?
I don't know about you. There's definitely a lot of noise coming from the military. Of course, it's very unofficial, but I would say that the main impression that comes out of these noises is resignation. Resignation because you cannot fight executive orders. And as I said, I think most of the military brass, most of the military command believes that this is mostly rhetoric. This rhetoric will change regularly. There's a sense of chaos and confusion with regards to this, but it doesn't really affect either the structure or the envelope or the capabilities of the US military.
Now, Donald Trump, in his Truth Social post after that meeting yesterday, he once again mentioned Greenland. Now, it was not an explicit threat, but it did raise the spectre of the threats that he'd made earlier this year, which European NATO members, we've since learned, were taking very seriously. Could Greenland turn out to be a flashpoint again?
There's a pattern, and what could be said at the beginning of the year with regards to Greenland can be said now again. Prior to important talks, important meetings, important decisions, Trump is upping the ante. So it's a kind of a game. It's a negotiation game. You bring up all of the problematic issues, and you apply a lot of pressure on your negotiators.
Thank you very much for that, Alexandre Vautravers, Editor-in-Chief of Revue Militaire Suisse.